Welcome to the Only Brother Sister podcast, built for teachers, by teachers, dumplings over flowers.
I'm the sister, Nicole.
And I'm the brother, Izzy.
And this podcast is here to take you on a backstage tour of our combined 50 years of experience teaching so that we can help you recognize and celebrate substance over appearance.
Or dumplings over flowers. Yeah. Well, Waterman, spin the wheel.
Hey.
Well, hey.
Hi.
Nice jacket.
Nice shirt.
Thanks.
Why'd you pick the purple, like me?
Because we are in New Orleans,
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Louisiana. We are at the FETC conference.
Future of Educational Technology Conference.
Yeah, and we are both offering some knowledge and gaining some, including what I didn't know, the color of the beads and what they mean. It means something. I have memories of New Orleans back when the beads were just kind of arbitrary, let's say. Didn't know it had actual meaning to it.
Well, yesterday in our workshop, somebody told us the meaning of the colors of the beads. And she said, oh, did you know that the beads have meanings, the colors? And somebody else said, yeah, it means like lift your shirt up. She said, no, they have real meanings.
No.
So we have purple beads, yellow beads, and green.
Gold, yellow, yeah.
Gold. Purple is justice.
Mm-hmm.
Green is faith.
Mm-hmm.
Gold
Mm-hmm.
is power.
Yeah, and
So justice, faith, power. Three things you think of when you think of Mardi Gras. Am I right?
yeah, and three things that we think about in schools, right? There's oftentimes this a power, and somebody in the workshop reversed the idea and said that they chose power to represent them because they are looking to empower, right? So it was
Because
really
of course,
cool.
let's explain this. Of course, we were like, oh, that sounds great. Let's introduce ourselves by saying,
Yeah.
your name, where you're from, and what color bead you think you would choose to best represent
Right.
you and what you're about.
So it's not about holding power, right? And that's the whole educational process. And I think that's something we'll probably touch on a lot. It's about sharing these experiences and kind of relinquishing what we would think as teachers as what the power would be. But let's also get to the idea of justice, because we heard an alternate definition, right? Justice
For the beads,
yeah.
purple sometimes also means loyalty.
Right. And I love the idea
cool.
of loyalty. Well, first of all, we come from an Italian family, so that's kind of important, but I'm sure it is to every family. And even inside the confines and the ideas of being loyal to a mission, a cause, something greater than ourselves, it's so important because that drives a lot of educational initiatives and or really derails them. It's really important. So I think we have a topic that might be able to talk a little bit about loyalty. Waterman might have filled me in. Yeah, a sneak preview. So let's hear, Waterman. What was the topic? What came up?
A dog named Griffin.
A dog named Griffin.
Well,
Loyalty.
man's best friend. Loyalty. Yep.
See what I did there?
Yes, I do.
That's why I wore the purple.
I don't love that you were pre-filled in.
Well, you got to talk to Waterman about that. Don't hate on our relationship. We had to get mic'd up differently, being
Right.
kind of on location. And he whispered in my ear.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Waterman,
He's got a soft touch, too.
you're dead to me. So a dog named Griffin is a dog that we know.
Oh, yeah. You want to go? I mean, or I'll go. What do you got?
A Griffin is a golden doodle.
Yeah.
That is probably what? You're the spatial person. How tall is Griffin?
I thought he was a camel. When we first met.
For reference.
just as an idea. Maybe a stunted, growth camel.
I mean,
probably.
you could ride him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Me, with my stubbiness, I probably wouldn't hit the ground.
That would have been amazing.
Yeah. But no, he definitely, a child could ride Griffin all day.
I mean,
All day.
technically could, but
Didn't. But had the chance to.
Griffin was not
Didn't they?
having that. Yeah, so we met Griffin, who's a huge golden doodle, in a school. in our school.
Yeah. So we have we have a what we called our demo school, or our Mosaic Academy, if you will, where really we were able to forge such a solid relationship that we with the administration and the teachers and even the students, that our presence there became part of their norm and their culture.
Yep, for years, for a consistent, how many years before that? 3 or 4 that we were
4. Yeah.
Yeah, that we were consistently there, and then all of a sudden,
Yep, a leadership change, and then came a new administration, and then came Griffin with that administration, a service dog. Oftentimes thought that we maybe she rode him in. Maybe that was part of the transportation.
no, he was there.
He was a great dog.
Yeah, he was a great service dog. But it was just representative of how different the environment was after that change.
Right.
All of a sudden, what you're used to is so not what you're used to.
Including having a dog literally roam the like free too. Like, it wasn't just a little lap dog that would hang out and
Or follow its owner.
right. An owner, if you're listening, we're not. I'm in more of amazement at what happened than I was in judgment, because
Definitely.
This was something we would be doing, professional development, PDs, and all of a sudden this dog would walk in and just sit down and just hang
Or
out.
like
Remember?
some people were sitting in a
petting,
desk, and
yeah.
he would just walk up and like get under their hands to be pet.
Yeah.
I at that
Sweet
point,
little guy.
see, now I wish I had. I recently got a dog,
Right.
Dasher, and
Shout out to
shout out to Dash. He is. We've had him for a year. He's a year and a half old, but I have such a different perspective about dogs and having dogs around and the benefits of that and all that. I maybe wish I would have had that experience under my belt before I encountered Griffin. But at the time I was like, what? This dog just needs to walks up to people expecting to be pet. What if you're allergic to dogs? Yeah.
Right.
A whole bunch of questions.
Well, isn't that, the case in what we found in education?
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Talking about education?
Yeah. So
Tie
one
it
of the
in.
things that connect in my head, just as I heard the topic, and hey, for the listening audience, and for the viewing audience, we have a wheel worth of stories and titles to those stories that, when get spun, Warnerman tells us, never so far hasn't been whispered in my ear except today. But
Yeah. What?
but it's a surprise, and we don't really know where the conversation is going to go till we get the topic, and don't discuss it together until we get the topic, like you're seeing it happen here. And so what happened when I first thought of it was, for this, was the idea of too much too soon. And like you said, when that administration came in, the dog became a representative of the idea of like, everything's going to change. And it's as shocking as having a dog walk into your PD and lay down on the floor, for me.
Or eat your lunch out of the plate.
But that's true.
Down to the paint colors.
Yeah.
Everything about the environment that we knew. And
Yeah.
we didn't teach in that building. We may as well have.
Right.
We were there at certain points, 4 days a week
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah,
But we were, for all intents and purposes, just visitors in that space. It wasn't like our home. The name of the school changed. The color of the lockers changed. Everything about
On
that
purpose.
environment
Right.
changed to make a shift, to signify that shift.
Right.
And the dog was just really, actually, as big as he was, the smallest piece of that.
True.
But imagine we are, professional adults who are supposed to be able to adapt to those things, and we did, right?
Yeah, well.
But imagine being a student in that school, and things have completely now shifted. Rules, mission, the way that they did attendance, their schedule, the timing of their classes, just the way that they interacted with other schools in the building.
And what was one of the important pieces of design in that building was that it was a 6 through 12 on purpose.
Yeah.
So there was this great sense of continuity that was established. And so that was a major culture shock. And to the teachers, and I'm thinking back to some new teachers. There was about 3 or 4 new teachers that came in the building at that year, who now walked into not a culture war, but just confusion.
You're right.
There was nothing to bring them in and onboard them with, because everybody was now getting onboarded yet again to a new style, if nothing else.
Yep.
And what I found, in schools is that mindset shift, the smallest piece of that sends the biggest ripples out and changes everything.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I think we should talk about, and we should talk about it in terms of, well, heck, we just came off of, hopefully we're in endemic teaching, but I mean, consider the learning environments and the things that flipped upside down and how unprepared we were for that. So I really want to ask you the question, do you think that it was like factors like that, like changes, mindset shifts, structure changes, do you think it was the same kind of disruption and upheaval, or, like how do we better prepare maybe for this instead of looking at it like it's always a bad thing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do we think about it from the vantage point of being ready for the anything, and how does that connect to like some of the messages we bring to teachers?
That's a really complicated question. So I'm going to say yes and no. There's no way to be ready for certain things.
Sure.
You can't always live in a state of readiness, because that quickly turns into a state of anxiety and projection.
Right.
And, that's the negative side of that. But you can live in a state of openness, flexibility, adaptability, and you can teach that and foster that in students. Obviously, part of 21st century skills, also part of global thinking skills, which is what we talked about yesterday in our workshop. But, there's been a lot of, in the work we do, there's been a lot of discussion about the differences between being like ready for another pandemic and like it's usually opposition. Like, and we have to say things like, oh, don't worry, we're not preparing for another pandemic or emergency or whatever. We are trying to shift the mindset into one of flexibility
and responsiveness, right?
Responsiveness, adaptability. But that's so much more complicated than just saying that, and saying, don't worry.
Right.
That rarely works.
Right. No. The messaging is obviously super important to me, and would have been. But
I think if I could just keep answering, I think the practical application of that answer, the practical side of that answer to that question is, even though we can't always live in a state of perpetual preparedness or prediction or whatever, the ways that we could perpetually be adaptable and be flexible are to think about and anticipate the ways that we react to change.
Right. That's great. You got there much better than I was, because I was like, I guess the real thing is, how did we deal with it? And that could help us to figure out how to be ready for it.
The only way we can think about readiness is to reflect on what has already happened. I'm a big advocate of reflection, for reflection. And this is a skill that you could do yourself, but it's also something that you can do in front of and with students and model what happens.
Right.
I think one of the positive kind of disruptions from the pandemic and remote and hybrid teaching and using digital tools, whatever, is that teachers were struggling in front of students because of no choice. They didn't have a choice but to do that. But I think if we intentionally kind of say, okay, so now there's a dog in our school.
Right.
The proverbial dog in our school.
You're going to talk about the dog in the corner?
Yeah. Here's what I'm doing to adapt to that. Here's what the plan is. Here's what, to the best of my knowledge, these are our options for response. Not necessarily this is what's going to happen. These are our options for response. So to say, I like it too. It just happened. To say, okay, so we could either, when the environment changes, we can do this, this, and this. When the content changes, it's basic differentiation is what I'm talking about. And these are options for responding to that change.
Yeah, and normalizing that would probably help with people, with teachers who struggle with thinking through differentiation from the vantage point of like, what are the known attributes of success, and ways that the whole group would be like, everybody, here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, the rule. then what are the ones that need to be adapted to a set of kids, students, people, teachers? And then how do we roll this out and make sure that there's additional support individually? And that just makes too much sense, because I think about planning. I mean, we are Mosaic Instructional Planning, or sponsored by, I should say, and of course, co-founders of, and that's at the heart and the root of everything. And then when we added, the reason why we named the podcast Dumplings Over Flowers is because when you think through the thing that will sustain you over the momentary thing, then you have to think about the ways in which something or might or can change, and not really let it throw, because we're also modeling that, and with and in front of the students. So it's really, really important to examine that. One of the things I used to say, and I really liked also about pandemic teaching, we'll call it, was it felt like, I used to say, it feels like we're veteran teachers, 30-year teachers, first-year teachers. We worked with teachers who only got to their first real brick and mortar building a year and a half into their career. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. You don't grow up thinking that. It's just not the picture you have in your head. And so, but all those people were in the same lifeboat, trying to row in the same direction at the same time. And this is my 33rd year in education in some way, shape, or form, including, I guess, it's really my 55th year in education, because or 50th, I started at 5 years old, let's say, right? So just looking back on my experiences in schools and how they changed, and like I was in an open school with no walls in the classroom, and then walls, and an outdoor school and an indoor school, right? So all those environments really changed. And here was another one that we were just, again, it felt very unprepared for. And I do think it comes back to the way we approach differentiation or planning of instruction.
Well, there's the idea that we can plan for change, but I think that's just an undertone, or should be an overlay on everything we do. I have to say that when the pandemic hit and all of teaching was changing, in fact, I have some like Facebook posts that come back up, like years later, whatever, in your memories and stuff. Yeah. And I was super excited for education to change. Yeah. And I couldn't believe that wasn't the majority opinion. I see some posts like, "Oh, I've never been prouder to be a teacher," which is also true. Like the resilience,
and should be commended. That was incredible.
Yeah, for sure. Right. But I was like, "Oh my gosh, we've been screaming that we don't want this factory model of education. Right. This is the chance. This is our opportunity to hit reset, and like rivers are clearing up, and the ozone layer is whatever % better. We can change education right now, and it's going to happen." And that was not the majority response, and I was shocked.
Yeah. Well,
now, obviously hindsight is,
of course, and we
2020. The year.
Yeah, I got it.
Saying
I was letting that sink in for our viewers. The incredible piece of that, right?
Waterman just got it.
Is that we were able to see that from 30,000 feet. And that was what our hopefulness was. And that was what our messaging was with the people in the schools we work with.
For sure.
But when I stepped in with a teacher to co-teach her class during that time, I realized the grind and the extra piece of that. Now, where I go, I think just by nature, is to always make dumplings when I have some leftover flowers, because I'm just trying to say, okay, so I got all excited because I'm like, all right, I'll now add a video library of different math lessons,
right?
And how do I use that? So I guess the question is, what I'd love to hear too is, what were some of the responses to the pandemic that carried over? What are the things, and that goes back to Griffin. And the idea of wholesale changes, and being, like you said, yes and no, right? Being okay, but probably not the wisest move. And you talk about that a lot with strategies, even, right? Maybe elaborate on that as just a little more granular.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about implementing new strategies,
Well, teacher strategies, student strategies, both, any, right?
any and all for yourself, for
Right.
whatever. But in teaching, when we're planning and we're trying a new strategy, those who use Mosaic know that we have a bank of strategies.
Shameless plug. Okay. Go ahead.
We have a bank of strategies,
Yeah.
and some are new because we invented some of them.
Right.
So when you're trying a new strategy, it's important that you're trying that in a really safe way with content that's safe, not new content. So you never mix a new strategy with a new content.
Right. And
It's just
and sometimes to elaborate on that a little bit, we also talk about like early year mandates, different things that have the health form and the code of conduct for the school, like different things. You can use strategies
safe
to bring that to the table, so that you're not only bringing a strategy to the table from almost day one, but it's also what you just said, it connects with safe content.
Yeah, and just low stakes, especially when we're talking about the different dimensions of what it means to use a strategy in your classroom. So it's like the social, emotional aspects of that. We could even mathify it.
Yes. I don't know how.
I don't either.
And so go on.
That's why I never do it.
Why'd you try to just slip that in?
Because I want it to be in.
All right.
I wanted to try it. I like when I shoot the lasers. Wing, 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 or the air horn. But we can do like those interest inventories, in a very different way, getting to know you things. One of the best examples of that for us, I think, that we do in our workshops is make rubrics with students.
Right.
And we do it in a very low stakes way first. How do you make the perfect pancake? Yes. What does the perfect piece of pizza look like? And we put it on. That's a way to mathify it.
Oh,
We mathify it.
yeah.
Put it in a rubric, mathify it. There's numbers involved. I don't know.
It's okay.
I'll never mathify anything. But that's a low stakes way to do a new strategy.
Yeah.
We're not sitting down and saying, hey, we're going to create this rubric together for, this end of the year assessment. So now, we've never done this ever. And you're going to think about what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah. Or giving no buy-in too. Here's the one from the state test, and that's it. Like without it doesn't give enough clear understanding of why I even care about these levels. And besides the static, so it's not just about what's written on the page. I can read that. What are the in-betweens? Where's the nuance to it? How much do I have to do to accomplish the next level, and so on? When students create that, they recognize that and realize, the subtle differences between, a pancake with butter and one that, has margarine or whatever their family recipe might be.
We have to do a whole other episode on the different recipes we've heard, the different criteria for perfect pancakes that we've heard throughout the years, because
Waterman, make a topic.
no, well,
Why?
maybe like,
It should be a topic.
yeah.
And cooking in the Mosaic.
We do revolve a lot of our stuff around food.
I know we have a podcast episode already with Siddle around fajitas. We have one with our good friend Al Pisano around pizza.
Yep.
And then we trained the perfect pancake. So I think it's clearly appropriate.
Maybe manja.
Yeah. Well, we'll let Waterman we'll workshop that. So to bring this kind of to a head here, what I think the moral of the story is that a dog named Griffin is a representation of wholesale changes that sometimes are a little frightening, and sometimes feel like your entire world is upside down and is new and different. And we have to recognize as high quality, fully informed, intentionally planned educators that oftentimes students feel like that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And those structures that we're so familiar with and think we're displaying and giving out, and even modeling very well, don't always sit well with everybody, right? And it's something we need to think about.
Or great intentioned people who say, oh, I have this really great new exciting thing we're going to do today, guys. It's going to be so much fun. It's so cool. There's a kid in the room that's panicking because that kid doesn't respond well to quick changes like that.
Right.
He's not going to think it's fun. He's going to think it's terrifying. The idea also for those response options for the way that we respond to change, the involvement of students in the buy-in that you're talking about when we're doing that low stakes rubric, it's the same thing when we're talking about implementing a huge change.
Right.
So, hey, this is, going to happen. We're changing right now. Let's talk together about the ways that we can respond to this. It's not going to happen all at once or, whatever. We're going to try to control what we can control of those circumstances. That's like moving the dog into the school just in the office.
Right.
And then the hallways and then your classroom and then,
introducing it, gradual release. Right. And so we also talk a lot about filtering planning decisions around post. And I almost think that if you consider adopting a new strategy, a new seating arrangement, anything that's going to be a disruption in the classroom, and whether we consider it to be a disruption or not, should be filtered through the idea of post and made clear, let's call it posted, to the students in terms of what is the purpose. You tomorrow you're going to come into class and the desks are going to be in clusters of 4. What is the expected outcome? I thought you were going to say, oh.
Well, why are the desks, because I'm waiting for the purpose. Why are the desks in clusters of 4?
Because that's the outcome. So because we're going to be using a new strategy tomorrow, and you're going to have a great time with it, and it's going to be fun. But I just want to give you a little preview, right? And then S is the strategy. So you say, hey, we're going to do this thing called speed dating tomorrow. Don't worry, you're not going to actually have to date, but it's a really great way to share ideas and so on and so forth. And then time. Right.
We're going to practice this for We're going to practice this for 15 minutes. Here's how it's going to go, whatever. Yeah. So the purpose in that case is to really just practice a strategy.
Sure.
But within that, let's say we're practicing speed dating strategy. We are going to have some kind of content to use to practice it. It can't just be, so now sit in front of each other and when you hear the timer, talk about nothing. And when you hear the timer, whatever. It has to be for an academic purpose, but one that's low stakes, or not an academic purpose,
right? Or
it's engagement. You have to have engagement on some level.
So I was going to suggest that maybe that could be done twice. So consider time as an ally here to both the functionality of the strategy. So we're going to go through this process and talk about and discuss who the greatest of all time is in basketball. And if you don't, or who you think the greatest athlete of all time is, even if you're not a real sports fan, who comes to mind when you think of that? And have this discussion, this sharing of ideas. And then we're going to replay this whole thing talking about the Revolutionary War and some of the things that stood out.
Right. That's a good point. It doesn't have to be over months or weeks or something. It could be like in the same day, you're introducing the strategy for 15. And then for 25, you're doing the Revolutionary War or whatever, but a pointed maybe question about it.
And especially now, we got into talking about pandemic takeaways and pandemic teaching. And it's a very popular, and it's an opinion I hold now as well, that it's connection before content. And so when and maybe that is the wrap to this episode, if you will, if I might be so bold, that when we're looking for connection before content and we apply it to every piece of this process, including new strategies, new structures, new devices we might be using in class, as we introduce new things and stay responsive and flexible throughout the year, we do it in such a way that we're always considering connection before content. Both equally, content might play a bigger role in some teachers' minds, and that's more important, but don't forget to make connection over content or before content.
Tie that into Griffin.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And
I dare you. And while you do, I'm going to talk about Mosaic Instructional Planning.
Sure.
It is our cloud-based lesson planning platform that offers teacher support at every planning point where teachers make a decision.
Right.
We offer unique data points for administrators, really unique feedback for teachers, and personalized resources for students that could be translated into 13 different languages as teachers plan.
That's my favorite part.
Mine too.
Yeah, because as a teacher, I would get so stuck in the materials that I wasn't really intentionally planning and thinking about, the lesson flow. And really, it stops my differentiation.
Yeah, and it refocuses. That's what our intention was to refocus the teacher on the work of teaching, which is the planning, the important job. And then those materials will come from the plan rather than vice versa.
Yeah.
Anyway, tie it back to Griffin. Connection before content.
Yeah.
Petting before feeding. But I don't know.
I thought I was supposed to.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I think petting before feeding.
Really?
No. But until next time, mug, water bottle.
Yeah, I'm going water bottle because we're in New Orleans.
Shameless plug for some great beignets and coffee.
And we're launching the podcast.
That's right.
Cheers.
Hey everybody, this is the unseen but ever-present Waterman. Thank you for listening to Dumplings Over Flowers. Our current plan is to have new episodes every other week, so be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube or follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube or on social by searching Dumplings Over Flowers or @DumplingsPod. That's @DumplingsPod. Also, don't be afraid to leave a comment on our YouTube channel. Your comments, questions, or stories may very well inspire the conversation in our next episode. If you would like to know more about our cloud-based lesson planning platform, you can visit mosaicip.com. Once again, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.